Secretly recorded from deep inside the bowels of a decommissioned missile silo, we bring you the man, one single man who wants to bring light to the darkness and dark to the lightness. Although he's not always right, he is always certain. So now, with security protocols in place, the protesters have been forced back behind the barricades and the blast doors are now sealed. Without further delay, let me introduce you to the host of Hutcast, Mr. Tim Hutner.
Thank you, Sergeant-at-Arms. You can now take your post.
Today on Hutcast, John Hoffman District 36 is coming in to have a conversation about bonding, what it means to you, what does the redistricting and how it applies, and of course we kind of go off on our little tangents here and there and have some conversations besides that. So for Hutcast, we'll be back in just one moment.
Now a word from our sponsors. Today's sponsor in part by Excel Roofing. Excel Roofing, they do it all. Roofs, siding, framing. You need a house? Give Excel a call. I've used these guys personally in the past, have a professional crew. They're conscious of your job, and they want to produce the finest quality of craftsmanship available. Excel Roofing, 763-712-0757. Again, 763-712-0757. Excel Roofing, Dayton, Minnesota.
Today on Hutcast, we have Senator John Hoffman. Welcome to the studio. Can you fill us in on yourself real quick and what you do?
Hey, Tim, good to be here. I represent Champlin, Coon Rapids, and Brooklyn Park in the Minnesota Senate. That is called now Senate District 36, and I've been here since 2012. It's good to be back on your show, Tim.
Well, the first time we were doing this via phone because of the COVID restrictions, but today we're live, well, pseudo-live, and we're going to have some conversation about redistricting. Now, John, a lot of people out there, they have this don't want to pay attention to, but want to pay attention to, don't have time for politics. Let's tell them what redistricting means to them and why it's important.
Absolutely. You know, it's funny how you say that, don't want to be involved in politics. Well, if you're not involved in politics, politics is going to definitely be involved with you, right? I mean, that's an old saying from years ago.
Oh, for sure.
But redistricting basically is this. Every 10 years, we'd go through the census, right? And you get a count of how many people there are in a state, in the state of Minnesota. And what that does is it counters up against the fact that there are 67 senators in the state of Minnesota and 134 state reps. And how Minnesota lays this out, those 67 senators must have close to the same amount of people that they represent. And right now, one senator represents 80,000 people in Minnesota.
Oh, boy.
Of course, our population increased. So then you got to go, all right, now that number goes up to 85,000. So it's 1 in 85,000. And so you look at the census, and the census starts to say certain areas either grew in population or they did not grow in population. And for example, the city of Minneapolis grew an extra 60,000 people, right? City of St. Paul in the area grew an extra 30,000. So where did all those people come from? You know, a lot of them came from outer state, great state, Minnesota, right? And so you then say, well, what does my current Senate district look like? And the population, for example, ours, Tim, went from 80,000 that it represents to now it's about 87,000. So in a sense, this Senate district has to shrink. They call it shrink. You got to shrink 2,000 people down to get to that number, that sweet spot of 85,000. Well, if you could just isolate each Senate district and shrink them, then you say, well, what happens to the outlying numbers, or what happens? Well, that's what redistricting is all about, where you get members of the House redistricting and members of the Senate redistricting get together, and they're supposed to come up with the plan. And of course, Minnesota being the only split legislature in the United States. And that means the House is represented and in charge by the DFL. And in the Senate, the Republican party is in charge of the Senate. So you're basically saying the chair of the Senate redistricting and the chair of the House redistricting bring their plans together and they have a conversation. Well, if there's no agreement on what the House and the Senate have, our state constitution then comes into play and says, well, the Supreme Court's going to do this. Now, that's a good thing because a lot of states don't really have that clear definition of saying if you don't have an agreement. And in Minnesota, I think there's a time period. Once we get back in session, we have like 10 or 14 days to figure this out. And if we don't, then the Supreme Court comes in and says, this is how the map is going to look for the state of Minnesota. That's what happened in 2010. Of course, you had the House was controlled by the DFL and the Senate was Republicans, right? Or maybe it was both and the governor. Anyway, 2010, I just know this. There was no agreement between the House and the Senate, and the Supreme Court came in and said, here's what the districts are going to look like. And what they tried to do in the past that they've done this is tried to keep the congruency or the similarities of the current districts that exist. Minnesota's never really gerrymandered. Never, ever, right? Some states they gerrymander, meaning, a district is laid out according to the benefit of one party. Well, Minnesota's never had that problem. Minnesota just basically says, this is where the population is. This is what it's going to look like. And in 2010, we were then called Senate District 47. We grew, so we had to shrink a little bit. And one of the congruent things that this Senate district has throughout the years, whether it been 49, 47, or now 36, the Mississippi River in these three communities, Coon Rapids, Champlin, and Brooklyn Park. The Supreme Court in 2010 said, we're going to keep it the same. You're just going to shrink. So Senate District 47 at the time lost a couple of blocks in Brooklyn Park and a couple of blocks in Coon Rapids, but basically the geographic footprint looked the same as it did in 2000. So 2000, 2010, and now we're in 2020, and we have to do the same thing.
I see. This is a statewide thing, correct?
Correct, Tim. You have to basically look at all 67 Senate districts and all 134 House seats and figure out how they are going to be equally representing population in the state of Minnesota. And there's various models out there and various opinions on how that should be done or how it can be done. And it's interesting. There's a couple models you and I can talk about that I've seen by a gentleman named Peter Watson, who has been, he's a retired state employee, and this is what he did his entire life. He's been doing nothing but redistricting since he was a child, is what he would say.
Mm-hmm. And does your redistricting affect on a local level, say, as a mayor or a Ward 1 for our instance?
And it's that you bring that. Like, I was on the school board, and we had to look at redistricting, and what they did there was, the way Anoka Hennepin was set up, they were set up in wards, and so each ward had to have an equal population. So, they had to, in a sense, do that. Some cities that are at large, it's not a problem, right? Because cities still remain cities, right? But those cities that have wards in them, if their charter says they have to have equal representation, and I don't know what the charter of Champlin is or the charter of Brooklyn Park, but I do know this. Brooklyn Park, they break their city up into three areas. They have a west, a central, and an east, and they have two city council members from each one of those three areas. And so my understanding is they just set their three areas to be equal population size. So there's some equal population clarity there.
I see. So it's not geographic; it is strictly by population.
Yes, and in the sense of that's the key point is the population. Now it gets interesting because it becomes geographically interesting because one model I looked at has the lower part of Brooklyn Park that is currently Senate District 36 and the eastern part of Brooklyn Park moving into a different Senate district. And then it has Senate District 36 shifting over into Osseo, Dayton, and to Rogers, right? That's one model. Another model I saw, it has the Senate District 36 shifting over to Osseo, Dayton, and the northern part of Maple Grove, right? Losing all of Coon Rapids. This river, Mississippi River, and some people have said, well, it's a non-contiguous Senate district. You have to drive through another Senate district to get to another Senate district. Well, okay. It's been like that for years, right? And so I looked at those two models and I went, interesting. You lose that congruency of the Mississippi River and you start to expand west. I don't know if that'll hold, but it sure plays with some interesting politics because, as you know, when you go a little farther west and a little farther north, of course, the districts get a little redder, Tim.
Mm-hmm. Well, I understand the red part. Let's back up a little bit here. So if you guys change your districting,
mm-hmm.
can a city follow? I mean, and I understand they want to have the even numbers so that no one district can crush all the other ones, just combine. But that leaves Ilhan Omar's District 5 up for grabs because that's a pretty big district.
Oh, congressional. Yeah, they have to look at clearly because we did not lose a congressional seat. Our population saved us from losing a congressional seat, right? We have 8 congressional seats. There was rumor because of our population, the census wasn't coming back the way that folks were thinking it was coming back, that we would lose one of our congressional seats, shrinking that down to 7. That did happen in Illinois, and I believe it happened in Wisconsin. There's a population decrease that said, well, you can't have X amount of congressional seats anymore. But Minnesota kept its 8 congressional seats. But those congressional seats also have to be based upon an actual number of people, right? You have, 5.6 million people in the state of Minnesota. Divide that by 8. That gives you X amount of numbers that each congressional seat must look at, right? So what does that mean? If Congressional District 5 had an influx of population, then in a sense, her Senate or her congressional district shrinks, right? Probably tighter toward the urban metro than it would anywhere else. And then you look at the 8th and the 7th congressional district, which is your northern and your western part of the state. They have to expand. So does the 8th district creep back down into Anoka County, maybe Coon Rapids, because there's a part of Coon Rapids that's currently in the 3rd district, and of course we Champlin are in the 3rd district. I saw a model that keeps Champlin in the 3rd district but moves Coon Rapids out of the 3rd district, and then it shifted over and it had Anoka as part of the 3rd district. Well, Anoka right now, of course, is part of the 6th district. So that's Tom Emmer, Congressman Tom Emmer, who has that.
Okay.
So, I mean, there's so many different models out there about, well, what does that mean? Where do they shift? And I think ultimately then the Supreme Court, and this is something that I need to look at, that decision also comes into play from them as well. What will this look like? What should it look like? How can it look like?
So let's break this up for some of the listeners. You understand we're like worldwide here, so a very narrow margin of our listeners are going to be in tune with this in Minneapolis here in Minnesota. If you're a young person, why is this important for you to be paying attention to this districting?
Oh, because it says who's going to represent me, right? And on the federal level, who represents me, those folks are so much attached to bringing federal dollars to your state, right? And so do I have a relationship with the individual? Does that person, bring value to the current congressional district that we're in? And that's important because of this. Highway 10, as you know, Jerry Newton, Jim Abler, and I have done this bipartisan collective work on making sure that our North Metro area gets the money that it's due, right? And you're a taxpayer, I'm a taxpayer, but we were always left out in the lurch, so to speak, because all of a sudden these state bonding monies and transportation dollars were going someplace else. Well, the last few years, we've just absolutely capitalized on our bipartisan set your politics aside and do what's right.
But that's a score thing, isn't it?
You know, sort of. I mean, it can be, but at the same time, you know, when you're looking at, you know, whose vote do I need and what area, what region do I need? I suppose you would call it a score thing.
I know the interchange in Dayton, the Brockton interchange,
yes,
they call it. Now, for years, we scored quite a bit lower than most other people who needed the money.
Right.
Now, for some reason, which this is my vision, I mean, I chair the EDA over there, and I'm visioning that this interchange is going to come across Dayton and go into the stub hub over in Ramsey to get another bridge going in north and south.
Well, you know, when you look at one of the first bills I ever did, Tim, as a freshman was the Armstrong Bridge on Highway 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget seeing how Brockton, if you look down straight south of there, you go, whoa, this kind of makes sense. And I mean, in one person's model, it makes sense. And I was also one of the co-authors to get the Highway 94, and I believe it was Brockton on the southern part, that entrance and off-ramp taken care of as well. But there was this wide path that said this makes sense to get the connection between Highway 10 and 94. In a sense, it would make sense to also have another bridge over there. But as of course you know, local politics come into play, right,
mm-hmm.
at the time.
No, they do.
And I'll never forget, there was a city of Dayton worker. I wish I could remember. There was a park named for her in Champlin. Do you remember her name? She worked for years for the city of Dayton.
Rings a bell. But anyway,
Phyllis. No, not a Dunn. Anyway, I'll get the name. But I'll never forget. I met with her when I first moved back to Minnesota and first moved back home here in Champlin, and I was meeting with her and Joan Molinar, and she said to me, and if you ever think, if you get into politics, that we ever want a bridge over in Dayton, you got another thing coming. That's what she said. It was like, I wasn't even talking about bridges in Dayton, right? But that was just that whole piece of it. But what have you known? You're on the EDA. Dayton is exploding in population and development. My gosh, right?
Well, it's not because of us. I mean, it's planned out for years and years, and it's in the comp plan that way. So it kind of sets down like, you know, who's doing what, where, how, and again, we're more of the business side of it. So the previous council had this notion to turn everything on and wide open.
Right.
And they tried moratoriums. They tried everything they could. They're getting pinched right now because they want to start capitalizing on this, and there's a whole bunch of stuff on that in the courts. So, you know, you look at that and go, okay, now what? But yes, we are exploding. Last count was 450 homes.
Wow.
And that's in one development. So I'm sure there's a couple more. And if you listen to the podcast, the Mayorcast of Dennis Fisher, he was on the podcast 2 weeks ago.
Right.
He had some information of things, and it was quite a good spot for that.
Interesting. You know, you talk about the new development. There's two right next to each other. You had Hayden Hills was one of my favorite golf courses to go to, right? Do you remember that one?
Yep.
And you know, it was the guy's old farm. They turned it into, it was a cool little golf course to play. I mean, if you wanted on the back nine, you could get in and out of there in like an hour and a half. It was just, you know.
Right. That was the Belize backside of that.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Chuck Belize, and his brothers, a big family in Dayton.
And it was such a great place. And then all of a sudden, poof, you know, they get approached and, you know, now it's developed. And then the Bower Berry farm, right, you know, just down the street from there for years, you know, a little 40-acre stretch, the last farm that existed in Champlin. And
the last one of Bill's farms
was there. Was the Bower Berry farm? Was that
Bower? Yeah, Bill Bower.
Really? I did not know that. So that was part of that larger family's farming at one time, huh?
Well, when I ran in 2016 for mayor of Champlin, I talked to Bill, and we had quite a conversation. He's grown some animosities with the current council, and I can see some reason why. But when he started feeling ill, you know, they kind of had to do something with the farm, and I guess that's what they decided to do. But our current mayor is kind of in that project, you know, head and shoulders deep. So again, I won't say any more about that. But
why not, Tim? I mean, it was like, no, I'm kidding.
because we're 78,000 listeners and we're in 40 some countries. And if this guy got back, I don't want to throw the dirt under this guy. And
I'm kidding.
when you smell something, there's usually something there.
Well, you know what? It's like that. Yeah. Follow the money. If there's something smelly, it's like, it's worth looking at. Right. And you just go, because, and it's really sad. That brings up a good point though. Tim, I got into public service because I was a policy person in education, right? You know my background. And I did 3 years in the Bush administration and the Federal Interagency Coordinating Council, and it was pure policy, and I loved it. And Jim Ramstad at the time was a congressman, and he always talked about, John, education and health and human services should never, ever, ever be about politics. It should always be about the pure policy. And I never forgot that, Tim. And that's how I operate. That's why I had 94% of my bills this last session were bipartisan, right? And I was in the health and human services and the aging world. And so it's like, that's there. I mean, that's just something that has to be. And I always had the belief that if you had honorable intentions about what you were doing, as policy work, that you would set your politics aside. Well, there's a few of us that believe that, right? That's why Jerry Newton and Jim Abler and I have gotten a lot done for our North Metro area, because we set the politics aside. We have to, right? So I appreciate you in the fact that you were running honorable intentions because you wanted to see some things happen in Champlin that a lot of people were talking about, right? And it wasn't about politics at all, Tim. And so, that's that public service mentality. And the same thing, what you're doing as a business owner in Dayton and being part of the economic development, what is it, EDA Association? What's that called?
Economic Development Authority, and it's
Authority.
called HRA, Housing Redevelopment Authority.
Correct. I mean, you're in it because of the fact that you want to be involved in the policy piece there. Then don't let politics get involved in it, which is, that's how it should be. Same thing with local school boards, and you're starting to see some school districts start to have Democrat, Republican. Yeah, it's never been that way.
And now we're talking an awful lot about CRT.
Yeah, and what about it? It's on the the federal college level, right? It's like, all right, well, show me in the school district. What's the CRT? Are they doing it? That was the same thing that when I was on the school board, there was a thing called, it's not even a school board mandated program. I mean, where's this conversation coming from, right? I want to know where this is coming from. But on the local level, I'm not seeing that yet, right? And so the key word is yet. And so who's driving that? And that should be, Tim, that should be a policy conversation. And that should be why do I want to get to where I want to be? What's the policy behind this? And if it's driven by a political agenda, it's wrong out of the get-go.
CRT is political.
And if that's the bottom line of it, then why are they doing it, right?
Well, how can CRT not be political?
That's a great question. I guess the question is who's driving it? Is locally, what are you hearing? Is anybody driving it locally?
I don't know if local's the right word. I would say more national.
Who's driving it nationally? Do you know offhand?
You got your theories, but you really don't. You don't really have any. You can't trust the news. You can't get your information that's reasonable. So no matter whose side you're on, it's like, okay, what's real?
Well, then bring it back to the conversation of it should be strictly policy.
It should, yes.
Right. I keep coming back to Jim Ramstad. Even Paul Wellstone was like that. And Jim Ramstad and Paul Wellstone were best friends. They used to go out to lunch, dinners together. Those guys did so much. And a lot of people never heard about that. Well, okay. Just like a lot of people don't hear about the fact that, Jim Abler is my best friend in the Senate and he's a Republican. So what, right? I'm a Democrat. So what? And I've heard Jim say that. So what? Are there things we disagree on? Oh, yeah. Right. But if I agree with you, Tim, 80% of the time, that makes me and you allies. It doesn't make us enemies.
Well, we shouldn't be enemies.
Right.
I mean, no matter what side of the fence you're on, there's either common sense or there ain't.
Right. I think Ronald Reagan said that, didn't he? 80%. If I agree with you 80% of the time, it makes you my ally.
He also said, I'm from the government, here to help you. Those are the worst words in the world. We're here to help. We're from the government.
That's funny. We're here to help.
Yeah.
That's a new slogan. That's the new Tim Huntner slogan. I'm here to help. I'm just here to help.
We're from the government. We're here to help you. Oh, boy. That's kind of an oxymoron, isn't it?
What was the other one? Jerry Newton, who was when he was on the school board, he, command sergeant major, he was, what was he oversaw the military science, I think is what it was called.
Okay.
And he said it's kind of an oxymoron, John.
Well, there's a lot of things going on in both the cities. Again, I chair the EDA in Dayton. I was running twice in Champlin. You see things that smell, you go after those, and eventually you either find what's making the smell or you just fix it.
Right.
And that kind of puts a taste in your mouth, doesn't it?
Yeah, you sit there and you go, when you're starting to see it too on local level, where people in school boards are resigning left and right because of, the politicalness that's occurring on the local level. It's like, whoa, what's going on here? Seeing, locally there was, I don't know if it was Chaska, maybe it was Chaska, or there was when the citizens can come in front of the school board and they say their thing. My gosh, Tim, a full fight broke out. And these two individuals were like, jeering at each other like they were in junior high school. And I thought, now these are adults and our kids are seeing these adults. Something's wrong with that picture, right? Do as I say, not as I do kind of thing.
Right. Let's bounce back to that one. Stay on task with the redistricting, because maybe we're at 24 minutes and 50 seconds into the first segment. So we're going to take a little break here. And when Hutcast comes back, let's dive into this CRT and how it shouldn't be. Or do you want to go back to districting?
We can go back to districting and really bonding. CRT's I'm not digging in that one at all, Tim. I mean, if you got something you want to bring up on it, there we go. But it's all that is theories on my end
for sure. All right, Hutcast will be back momentarily. Stand by. We're in the studio today with John Hoffman. John Hoffman, our senator in District 36, is it?
District 36, Tim, correct.
Okay. Stand by. We'll be right back.
We hear a lot about air quality these days, so keeping your indoor equipment running clean and efficiently is important to your health. The experts at Dependable Heating and Cooling in Coon Rapids have been servicing the Twin City areas for more than 25 years. With the latest and most efficient technology available, they will repair or replace your equipment and keep your indoor air healthy and comfortable. Call 763-757-5040. Our team of experts is standing by, waiting to help you with all your indoor needs. Mention you've heard about this by listening to the Hutcast podcast, and you will receive a $50 off any repair. That's Dependable Heating and Cooling. 763-757-5040. Dependable Heating and Cooling.
All right, we're back with Hutcast. John Hoffman in the studio today. John, we had discussed districting in the last segment, and you said something that caught my attention, bonding. So with this districting bonding, tell me how that works. Tell the people how that works.
That's an important thing, and it's good to be back with you again, Tim. I got to tell you, this is always fun to have conversations with you about best things locally, and then we go off on the ledge, and you always pull us back into what we're supposed to be talking about, right? That's always a good thing. It's important. Long overdue bills. Bonding is an important piece of infrastructure for the state of Minnesota. And I had talked about how Jerry Newton, Jim Abler, and I have worked together since 2012. Now, in 2012, when I was elected, the session that started 2013, Abler and Newton were House members. And here's the funny story. My first day as a senator, I come in, and here's in my office, and there was these stacks of these yellow bills. They call them jackets, right? And yellow means it's in the Senate. The green jackets bills are in the House, right? But I had these two stacks, and one was a Newton stack, one was an Abler stack. And I called these guys. I said, what do I do with these, right? And they said, sign them and drop them. And then they hung up on me. And I'm like, drop them where, right? Nobody gave me and then I called back, and Jerry Newton said, sign the bills. Jim and I put these bills together. You sign them and then drop them in the hopper over in the Senate. And I'm like, where's the hopper? And he hung up on me. And I called Abler, and I said, where's this hopper? And Abler's like, just go ask somebody. They'll tell you where the hopper is. And I'm like,
were you being hazed?
These guys were hazing me. But the fact is, so I they left me out there, and I made Xerox copies of all these bills, right? Just so I could read them. I wanted to read them, and And sure enough, so I did what they said. I signed these things because what you do is once you sign something, you drop it in the hopper, it just starts the process, right? I mean, a bill at the beginning is never going to look like a bill in the end, right? And so I read every one of those, and I went back to those guys and I said, gentlemen, I said, you were right. These are really good bills. I said, a lot of it was our infrastructure in the North Metro. And they started laughing. They said, we're never going to steer you wrong, John, but we were hazing you on the fact is, we were just, because you're brand new. You didn't know the terms of our hopper was. But those bills, it's important. I go to that story because a relationship didn't just develop at the legislature, Tim. This was years in the making. When I was on the school board with Jerry Newton, Jim Abler was our legislative go-to person, right? And we made a commitment back then that we were going to work together to make sure that our work from 169 through and around Highway 10, anything in this North Metro region, 65, University Avenue, those things that are important to us up here, right? Because it just directs the flow.
Right.
We were always going to work together. And 2 years ago, Newton called and said, gentlemen, the three of us got $135 million for the North Metro.
Huh.
I mean, we did it, right? And we would have had an extra $25 million on this third lane, but that's a different story. And I'm not going to throw somebody under the bus that was asleep at the wheel, but that's okay, right? But the three of us got this $135 million. Then this year, the important one we did is $35 million came to finish the Highway 10 project, specifically starting at the Rum River and then moving west, right? So
Yep, I've seen that.
Right, you see that. And now they're already starting to do the construction. They're starting to get everything set up. They're expanding Bunker Boulevard because Highway 10 for the next 2 years is going to be a mess. That Rum River Bridge is one of those hot spots that 90,000 cars a day pass over that bridge. And it's not in really good shape, right? And so we really worked hard to get that going. And then at the same time, we worked collaboratively with Emmer's office. Emmer, on the federal level, delivered millions of dollars in order to help, pump up what we were doing on the state level. And as such, that corridor is going to be finally taken care of, right? And so we kind of were like, nice. And I'll tell you a story. In the transportation, we had the first hearing we're in, we had 5 bills, right? The three of us were on. And we don't care who the chief author. I was chief author on 3 of them, and Jerry was one, and Jim was on the other. But I ended up giving Jim 2 of them, right? Because I was like, we don't care. The fact is, the 3 of us wanted to get some stuff done. And the chair of transportation on the Senate floor, he said to me, I'm going to tell you, Hoffman, what I told Abler. You get 1, right? That's what he said to me. And then he smiled. Well, guess what? Because we had Jerry's name on a different one, right? Jerry's chief authored bill passed. Jim's chief authored bill passed. And then my third chief authored bill, that passed too. So now Senator Newman laughs. He goes, yeah, I told you 1, but you got 3. And then he just jokes about it. We did that because we were purposeful on how we were going to work together and how we were going to get some things done in there. And so, it not only stimulates the economy, right? But bonding bills, they make vital safety improvements, Tim, to local roads and to interchanges, and it really does some other things. Like one that I got was providing more accessibility to the Mississippi Point Park, right?
All right.
And that's 3 Rivers Park, Rice Creek Regional Trail, and then we did some updates on business buildings on the Coon Rapids campus, the nursing and the business building on the Coon Rapids campus, right? Those were all projects that it took all 3 of us to really work collaboratively together in the Senate and get our counterpoints in the House to do it as well. So it's important you do that because I'll tell you this, the heavy traffic volumes and signals, like, for example, on Highway 10 at Fair Oak and Thurston Avenues, right, and U.S. Highway 10 and 169, that contributes to a severe traffic backup, traffic delays, and more than, Tim, 100 crashes per year, right?
So it's a safety issue.
It is a huge safety issue. Pedestrians, that's why we got to create safe areas there. So
what's your take on this? Every time we go in through Champlin, pick a night, doesn't matter what it is. Look at the backup we got before going to Anoka.
Oh yeah,
it's ludicrous.
It's going to get worse.
So, again, there's a lot of people in Dayton that say, we're not moving this over there. We don't want that bridge. I see a need for it, and where else are you going to put it?
There's no other way to put it. They should have years ago. If you look at the only other county road that comes up through us, right, is Winnetka. No, Douglas is county too, I believe. But when you pass those across the river, it's all huge residential over in Coon Rapids and Anoka. There's just no way you do it without really disrupting lots of folks, right? And so they should have done that, 60 years ago. That should have been something, right? And now, Dayton is got a couple of spots where it would make sense to do that. And my gosh, you look at that whole 101 north, all that business development that's happening over there.
It's huge.
It's huge, Tim. You're in the middle of this conversation,
I'm in the
right?
middle. So you understand what the cubes are.
Yes.
Okay. And that's almost 1 million square.
Wow.
And that's on the lake property side. A lot of people are upset on the Dayton community page about, well, we're not keeping this rule. It's been a rule for 100 years, 1,000 years. We're the last yeehaw in town. I mean, look all around us. It's built up. They've kept it so rural for so many years that you can't help but do it now.
Yeah. I mean, well, then the question is, what are you going to do? You're going to stack bridges? You're going to put a 2-layered bridge over 169 between Champlin and Anoka?
There's no entrance and egress and egress in that.
No.
So literally, you would have to tear up complete Anoka to do that.
Yep.
And that stub hub that's out in Ramsey, over by the RV shops.
Yep.
It's stubbed.
Yeah.
And it's sitting there.
Yeah.
And I'm sure MnDOT's got eyes on stuff, and they're not telling anybody, but it's going to happen.
Well, and they're part of the conversation. They've been part of this lengthy conversation that we've been in, this Highway 10 corridor and it's a moving target, Tim. It truly is,
I don't know what they can or can't do with it, but it's going to be something.
Yeah.
I mean, in our lifetime, it's going to be kind of a, can you get it done? Can you get it built? Can we keep the people down with it? What do you do?
Well, and look at like Elk River. I mean, the population in Ramsey, Elk River is growing, right? I mean, that is just something, and people are moving out that area because of the fact they don't want to live in a tighter urban sprawl, right? They want to get a little bit of space, but at the same time, that old methodology reminds me of what Doris Kemp was her name, by the way.
Doris Kemp Park. Yep, I looked it up.
Jeez. How long did it take me? 35 minutes to get to that? If you look at what Doris Kemp told me 20 years ago when I moved back home, that was the prevailing attitude back then and prior to that. And if that's still there now, folks aren't thinking about the bigger picture, right? It's almost I'm going to draw my line in the sand thing. I don't know. That's
Doris Kemp was a administrative secretary, wasn't she?
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah, I remember when I moved here back in '86, she was one of the main gals up there.
In the city of Dayton.
Champlin.
Oh, yeah. But then she went to the city of Dayton, too. That's how I knew her, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, then why is she on a Champlin property?
I don't know. Because she's from Champlin.
Huh. Yeah, Doris Kemp Park.
Yes. Look at her history. You should look her up. Can you Google her real quick? What was her?
I'm trying to keep this noise out of my mic. I don't know how I'm going to be Googling that.
That's I can hear that.
It's on your mic, so we'll have to figure out that after the next break here. But so you people out there listening, if you hear a little hum, buzz, that's something going on. We'll figure that out. All right. So this bill, if we district center of everybody, so like say each district has a certain amount of people.
Right.
And if those people need certain amenities in the city, which is our tax dollar, that's your tax dollar.
Correct.
How do you divide them up?
Oh, see, and that's where the thing is. But here's the brilliant thing. When the mill pond, you look at the mill pond, right?
Yep.
At $13 million, Tim, I was key to getting $13 million of your state money to the city of Champlin. First time in the history. And I'll never forget that when we first did the dam, it was Brett Eikamp said, this is the first time, it was Mark Uglum in the House who had it, and I had it in the Senate, right? And Eikamp said, And Army Nelson said this too. It's the first time in the history of Champlin they ever got bonding money. And I went, you're kidding me. How many years did we pay taxes to the state of Minnesota and never got any of that money back? Well, we got it now. Not only did that, but then the mill pond got another $3.9 million for bonding money for the mill pond. And then I was very crucially involved in getting $2 million to clean up that mill pond, right? That was through the LCCMR, the Legislative Citizens Commission on Minnesota Resources. And 3 times they presented that bill in front of the LCCMR, and 3 times it died. And at the end of the day, I was able to bring this thing back because, Todd Tuneman, who is now retired, right? He was able to get talking about why the water quality has changed. And he explained this up the Elm Creek. It was amazing. It was like sitting in a class on why it makes sense now to do it. And now, it's kind of cool. This past winter, people were ice fishing on the mill pond, Tim. I hadn't seen that in years.
Well, I don't know what kind of fish they're going for.
I think they stocked it, bass, walleye. They stocked it with, I wanted some muskie in there, but nobody let me have the muskie in there. I lost that fight.
They're a predator fish. They eat everything.
they only eat certain fish. Walleyes are predator fish too, right? I think there's northern in there as well, right?
I don't know. I don't fish the property.
Yeah, it's just kind of cool. It is just absolutely cool. And they won an award. The dam. They won a design award on that dam, and it's still one of my. Every time I drive by there, I just smile because it's like, yeah, all right, it's done well, done right.
So if they redistrict this,
yeah,
what area will you be in?
So the couple of models I told you about was I'm going to be in an area because I live in Champlin. So wherever Champlin goes, John Hoffman has to go, right? Okay. And if Champlin, if that one model of Champlin, Dayton, Rogers, and Osseo, then a little bit of Brooklyn Park go, then that's the direction I go. I don't see that happening. I see that makes sense when somebody drew out, well, where did the population move? Where are they trending? But it takes me away from the Mississippi River and puts me west, right?
I see.
There's never been a history of that. The history's always been around the Mississippi River, Coon Rapids, Champlin, Brooklyn Park. But there's the purist people out there who are saying, well, it's not a contiguous road to get from Champlin over to Coon Rapids. And then I stop and remind them, the 610 bridge makes it contiguous. It's no longer just the Anoka-Champlin bridge because they're right. You would have to drive through Anoka in order to get to Coon Rapids. But now you can just go right through 610. So
610 is kind of weird, though. You can get on certain things in 610, but you can't get off them. So let's say you're going towards Northtown from 10.
Yeah.
Try to get on 610 West.
Yeah. That's weird.
Or 610 East, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It ain't happening.
It's just, you got to go up and around.
Or you got to get back to the off-road, come back around that. I mean, it's like stupid.
How many times have you missed that turn? Me.
I don't even want to talk about it. I literally missed that thing more times. That's why I don't even go that way. So unless I'm going over to 35W, I don't even care.
It is kind of odd how 10, which is the old U.S. Highway 10, right? I mean, that was it, and they just tried to make that some kind of a thoroughfare in there, but then they crossed 10 and 10 and then East River Road, and you go, all right, well, where am I now, right?
Yeah. Well, East River Road, you can get to everywhere, but you can't get to it from the big road to the big road. You're like, how's this work?
It's funny,
but
it is our area.
But if the unit does go through the road, the bridge in the Dayton area, I know there's a lot of guys going to be upset, but depending on how much building we do ahead of time, I mean, that's going to really hamper that. With the cubes going in, all this new development, we're going to go to an opening for that bridge coming up next month. And we all got our replies in, so anybody who's on city gets to go over there and check it out.
Wow.
So, I'm headed up to that one. I want to see what it's like. MnDOT's going to be there. We're going to have some big players.
Nice.
And I'm kind of excited to see who shows up.
Well, doesn't it make sense, Tim? I mean, if you're going to open up the business park area, right? And all of a sudden you're saying, now I'm going to bring, because here's why it helps us. Our area is a property poor district area, right? We know this on the sense of when you want to raise $700 or $900 in state money for a school person, a child, right?
Okay.
You have to leverage the $100,000 piece of property, residential, $214, right? Take that same $100,000 piece of property and throw it out in Minnetonka or Wayzata or Orono, and you say, I want to get that same $900 from the state. You leverage that piece of property, $74. And that's just not okay. Years ago, Jesse Ventura wanted to fix it. And then, of course, it became political because Roger Moe wanted to be the governor and Tim Pawlenty wanted to be the governor, right? And so, of course, you know what happened. Tim Pawlenty became the governor. But in the sense of what would that do is all of a sudden you get a more mix of business. You're going to have some activity in here that are going to bring some value dollars, right? And going to get some job creation in there. And wow, you can flow how quick that would be to flow people out across that river up to Highway 10, going west or going east, or down to 94, going east or going west. It just absolutely is, I think, is an opportunity for Dayton to put a little sweet spot into the area.
Yes, but as an EDA guy, you talk to these big business owners, and a lot of them are my friends.
Right.
And I say, okay, so if this was to open up, what would you want to see? He says, I don't care what kind of roads you got. I don't care what kind of TIF money you have. Doesn't mean nothing if we ain't got the worker base to run the program.
Correct.
So they're all on that. I don't care what it is. Just find me some people.
Right.
Now, I don't know about you, but there's a lot of companies trying to get workers.
Right.
And I saw an ad the other day, McDonald's starting at $21 an hour.
No, where'd you see that one?
I want to go.
$21 an hour. It's $42,000 a year, Tim.
Yeah. I want to go there and work for that. I can stop all my headaches and problems and just go flip burgers. I'm thinking $21 an hour. Man, when I worked at the dealerships, I was at 17.
Yeah, and you know what you get to do? Customer service. You get to talk to people, right?
Well, I don't know. You're flipping burgers.
Well, but you also get to say, "Hey, welcome to McDonald's. How you doing?"
Well, I'm not a greeter. I'm a burger flipper. $21 an hour. What do they expect?
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. So now, as a technician, you need skilled labor, and then as a refab shop, you need even a highly skilled labor.
Right.
What do you pay your guys?
Well, that's a great question because, for example, we know there are 9 companies that want to come specifically to Minnesota because of our Minnesota State college and university system and the STEM programs that we're popping these kids out in, right? Mm-hmm. And, for example, Baxter Biopharmaceutical came and ended up getting Takeda came in and took over the Baxter plant, right? But there was strings attached to if you're going to come here and we're going to give you a tax break, right? They were guaranteeing 200 jobs at $75,000 a pop, right? These are kids with two-year degrees from science, technology, engineering, and math working in a environment of skilled labor in a sense, right? And doing it and making really good money. And that's what has kept that thing. Biomerics, same thing there. They came to Brooklyn Park. Development Fund, JDF Fund, or the MIF, Minnesota Investment Fund. Are we making sure that we're helping those businesses? Are we keeping that money in the bank so that we can offer these businesses those incentives to come here and attract good workers? They specifically want to come to Minnesota because of our workers, right? But here's your dilemma now. When you say McDonald's throws up a sign saying $21 an hour, if we got a people shortage person here in Minnesota,
yep.
Well, that's a different conversation. What's the demographer saying? What happened? We were having people come to the state left and right. We still are, but they're not coming at a pace that's strong enough for us, right?
Right. So a friend of mine who runs Shutterfly, he says, you got a great spot. You got, the cubes is going in. There's a lot of stuff going on. But where are the people going to go?
Wow.
And Shutterfly is no small company.
Oh, are you kidding?
I mean, they're a very big group. And I can't say names because I don't want to put nobody out there. But however, I agree with him. Where are you going to get these people? So when you redistrict these and you can put people into there and we can put these roads in, Dayton has very few north-south roads. You need more north-south, but then you're going to get the old timers who are saying, look, this is the way it's been for 100 years. We don't want to change it. Yeah. But how do you not change it when you're having 450 homes in a single year being put up?
Eventually, those 450 people that just put up their new homes are going to say to the city council and the mayor, we need to get around this town. Right?
They need that now. And if you go up by the Magnus Group, they need pipe in the ground over there. And that's coming out of Rogers/Otsego.
Right.
So how are you going to get any infrastructure there so that they can drop their 1 in 10 or to go up to 1 in 2.5 or et cetera?
Right.
So without building ghost areas for future pipe development.
Right.
Boy, I'll tell you what, and I'm kind of in the middle of one of those deals where you got to have something, but you still got to build. Yeah. Now, this is the most pristine spot in Dayton, and it's like an 80-acre chunk that a developer wants to go in there and light this candle.
Wow.
So it's real money, and if you do a 1 in 2.5, well, then they're all private septic. So the infrastructure and the bills we need to push that through, how, again, we're on the end side of Otsego, so Otsego's got too small a pipe to even control that. So we couldn't even buy if we wanted to.
Are they in the Met Council area?
Otsego?
Yeah, are they outside of that? Like Rogers is outside. It's part of.
Well, it depends on a certain area. I would assume that there's some in the Met Council.
They are.
Dayton's got Met Council because we got to push for high density. Yep. And nobody's a fan of that, including myself. They're stacking a lot of people on top of each other, and then now we have to deal with that.
Well, it's an interesting dilemma that you get, with that. Same thing happened in Brooklyn Park. I had a bill that was 101st Street, 101st and 169. There's a bridge there, right? Mm-hmm. And the city of Brooklyn Park wanted that to go in so they could then create this North Business Park that would have, put in, and they needed some help getting that. So I got that bridge. That bill was my bill, right?
Okay.
And prior to that, though, when they were working on it, they were laying all that feeder stuff, in this 367-acre farm, knowing that they were going to start having businesses come in there. And now, Tim, drive past there. You see those concrete boxes go up left and right.
Well, remember Project Hot Dish?
Yeah, I was in the middle of that one.
And that was when I was running I think I was running Ward 1 at the time.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of listening. I did a lot of listening on that deal. And you don't want to go in and make campaign promises, this, without following through, because then it's just hyperbole.
Right.
But I do believe we had some people listening.
Yeah.
And again, Project Hot Dish, because of an Amazon thing, I get why it didn't work.
Right.
But we had room in Dayton, but we didn't have an interchange.
Right.
So we were looked at way in the beginning when these guys needed a northern area. But I do believe that, if they come back, it's a much different world for them.
Well, it's at the time of that argument, I kept asking, what about 94 in Brockton, where all that stuff was already developed? There was some areas in there they could have thrown 2.6 million square foot building. But here's the thing that really, gnawed some teeth and grinding of the teeth or gnawing of the gums on, was that when I got 101st and 169 bridge passed, right, I was under the impression that it was for the 5,000 employees. It would have helped alleviate the transportation problem of Target North Campus, right? They have another 300 acres there. Plus, it would have done some development for that North Point. Nowhere was there any mention of a 2.6 or 2.5 million square foot building being put up, right? Mm-hmm. And then when I found out that was the case, it was not a happy day. Mark Uglum and I got together and went to the mayor of Brooklyn Park, and let him have it, right? Uh-huh. And now he's a county commissioner, and he and I laugh about it, right? I mean, we do laugh about it now because it's over. I mean, it just didn't happen. But my gosh, Tim, that was one of those sneakery slide something in there. And the question would have been 24 hours a day, you're up to 110 trucks a day on a road that the county has no desire of expanding. It would have been 2 lanes. You have 7,000 kids being transported on a daily basis to that cluster called, Champlin Park, Brooklyn Park High School, Oxbow Creek and Jackson. There's 7,000 kids right there. That's larger than the majority of school districts in the state of Minnesota. And no way. I mean, then it became this finger pointing between Champlin and Brooklyn Park. But at the end of the day, it didn't happen. But you're right. Project Hot Dish. How sneaky was that one? God.
Well, again, not that I'm on page with our current mayor at all, but he did go in there, and him and Uglum were on page with that.
Yeah, they were.
So he jumped in, and of course, he has a flair for the dramatic, our current mayor over here in Champlin. And he throws down this big book like...
I was there.
Yeah, okay.
You remember that?
I just went, really? Really? You're going to... I mean, who's he... everybody's there for against the same thing. And he throws the thing down and he wants everybody to look at it. Come on, man.
Yeah, it was a visual, big, thick, book of paper, and he threw it on the thing in
about
front
a foot and a half tall.
Yeah, a foot and a half tall.
What are you gonna do with that? So I kind of thought, okay, good for you, you did it, but you look stupid doing it. But hey, I mean, sure, he looks at some of the stuff I do and looks pretty stupid, but that was dramatic. The whole. Ugh.
It didn't win any support of Brooklyn Park, right? I mean, the citizens of Brooklyn Park, there was 50-50. There were people that wanted that coming in. They're like, do it. But there were people that didn't want it, right?
Yeah,
and
but they didn't live next to it.
Right. The ones that lived next to it. And here's the other thing. The ones that all of a sudden, people that had just built these $450,000 homes right across the street from it.
Yep.
When they were asking what's the development, they were like, oh, nothing. It's just going to be these small
schools,
little
a park, something. Anything.
Oh yeah, a little gas station over here, maybe a Target or a Walmart. I mean, they just did that whole thing, and then when people found that out, it was not one person in that development on the east side was happy at all.
You can't blame them.
I don't blame them. And then they wanted to. The city of Brooklyn Park wanted to take. Like 15 feet of Champlin property, and so I had neighbors across from me that would have lost their backyards, and that didn't bode well for me. So of course, I had to get in the middle of it, and I was in the middle of it, and I was mad because I specifically got money for 101st and 169 that was going to so-called alleviate the transportation for Target and to help build the business park, but nowhere was there conversation that some major corporation, we won't name the corporation because they're probably listening to this podcast, right?
They probably are.
A major, huge, gigantic organization would have come in there with no infrastructure.
Right. And you really, if you start from A to Z, you really wouldn't figure who they are out.
No.
But here's my point, getting back to why districting is important.
Yeah.
Had we not had you guys out there in the forefront dropping 1.5 foot boxes of paper on the ground.
Yeah.
So why is this important? People are listening. You got to understand that the people you represent are in that district. And those districts, they live in that district. So literally, you're preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
So they need you to do your job, and we appreciate that.
Thanks, Tim. And and that's what I was. My first door I knocked on in 2012, the first person said, I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, we just get something done. And at the time, and I said, yeah, I can get away from the brinkmanship, finger pointing, and I have done that. I have governed the way that I was taught by Jim Ramstad and the way I've seen how it should be governed, right? And that's the thing. It's also being accessible to people that are constituents, right? If all of a sudden now they redistrict to an area where it's like, I have nothing, I don't know anything about, and you take away from what took me 10 years to really get some really good development for our area, the people in Coon Rapids, if I get away from there, I got tons of money for Coon Rapids. Not me. It's not about me, Tim, but I was that leveraged to be able to get the Hanson Bridge. That was my bill, right? Mm-hmm. The TIF that they finally in the old downtown, now you see this beautiful development going on. That was me, right?
How much they TIF?
I can't remember what it was. This was in 2014, 2015, and they extended. There was a 7-year period. They went beyond that, and they weren't getting renewed. So I brought a bill to let them renew it, because there was the bubble that burst in 2008. There was just a period where that land just sat empty and nobody was doing anything, but they needed that. They needed a TIF for that. And so I did that. Now that was a battle. That was a huge battle because there are some tax people that don't want to give any kind of TIF incentives anywhere throughout the system, right?
Now for people that don't know what a TIF is, in lieu of your taxes on a piece of property, it has to pass the and or but for law. And when you have a TIF, you get a third from school, you get a tax, should we say, delete for 11 to 10 years, or whatever your math works out to be,
Right.
and then one from county.
Correct.
So there's where the three numbers come in on a TIF. So if you're in the school district and they have to vote more money in, that means if a TIF took that money, that's where that money would have gone.
Correct. And that's hence the word tax increment financing.
Yes.
Right. I mean, that's where that all comes down to. And you just did a good job of explaining that. So when you hear people say TIF, now you know.
Yeah, and not all TIFs are bad.
No.
A lot of people think TIFs are evil. It just depends on where you are in life. So we're in our mid-50s. Our kids have graduated. They're out of school. So TIF for us for school is like, okay, we even though we live in the district and have to pay for that, we have other things we need.
Right.
And infrastructure and roads are one of them.
Well, and part of it in the city of Champlin, I had a bill, and Zach Stevenson had the bill in the House that was a TIF bill for what's happening right now down there by the Mill Pond, right? That beautiful big development that's going on down there.
Mississippi Crossings, or what's the new one now? High Point Park?
Yeah, is that what they're calling it? I don't know, but when they did the shovel ready,
Yeah.
guess who didn't get invited?
We had this conversation. Yeah, they failed to call you. And if you guys are listening, shame on you. Because John's a pretty good ally if you want to, work with him. I always tell everybody, I'll be your best friend or your best enemy. You choose.
You choose. You get to choose this one, right? That was like when we finished Armstrong, right? It was Abler and Newton in the House and me in the Senate, right? And here it was time to cut the ribbon for the bridge, and we didn't get invited.
No.
Abler showed up, and the person that was doing, it was county politics at that time, and the person
County politics.
Did you believe that, Tim? Well, the guy he was up there because it's his area, and he said, for those elected officials that are here, thank you, right? Well, there was only one there. It was Jim Abler, and he knew him. He should have said, ladies and gentlemen, Senator Jim Abler over here worked with John Hoffman and Jerry Newton and got us this bridge, right? It's like
so you get dogged all the time.
it's just dog, right? But there lies in that whole piece. Why am I doing what I'm doing, Tim, is because comes back to my policy roots and what we should be doing, right? It's not about me. It shouldn't be about me, right? I mean, there's so many egos out there, and I don't need to have a clock tower named after me, right? It's like we're just getting our due, what's due us here, and I love going to battle for our area, Tim. That's something I want to do again in 2022. The priorities for 2022 are really there's some things on the pandemic relief, some things on continued equity and accessibility for people with disabilities. There's so many things that are still sitting out there that need to get done and finished.
And you want to finish them.
I want to finish them, dude. I really do. And it's like, so now you're going to have this redistricting, and all of a sudden I might have to go out west, which is fine, right? But now I got to start all over again and convince those people out there that I'm the right person for the job, right? Mm-hmm. Where I think I've done that in the three communities I represent right now.
Well, you know what they say? They say it's not what you do when the cameras are on. It's what you do when they're off. That's what builds character.
There you go.
And you mentioned earlier your constituents.
Yes.
That shows submissive. Doesn't it?
I don't know.
So when I ran, I made sure and lose some buzzwords, and constituents was one of them. Because then it shows a subservient to a person who's running. I would call them my voter base. I'd call them my people. Whatever it is. But constituents was one of those. So
That's interesting. I never thought about that because, in the sense of, it's like, do you have a client? Do you have a consumer? What's the, people get into the, but really, if you dig down the hole, you go, all right. And on the state level, it's written in our rules. We have to be accessible to our constituents because the constituents are the ones who put us in that seat, right? I mean, it's in there, and that's been around since 1905. But hey, you just raised something, Tim. That's interesting.
I know what you're talking about, and we've had this discussion, me and a certain another gas station owner here in town.
Oh God, he's funny. I love him, man. It's the Dino the dinosaur, man.
So we've had this constituents, and he brought it to my attention once, and I went, you got a point. That constituent shows subservient, and if you listen to him long enough, and he's a hardcore Dem, and he loves to tote that, but he's also old school hardcore.
I never knew that about him. You know, it's funny because we always go there and get gas, right? And then we always got to see what his wife is doing with the new dinosaur, right? The Dino the dinosaur there, and it's just, it's really kind of a cool thing. It's a moniker for the city. I like it, right? I really do. But I didn't know that about him. And when you told me that, I was just laughing. I thought, that's great. 'Cause what a great place to do it. You have your own shop, same as you. You have your own shop. You can have conversations all day long about what's going on in the world. That's awesome.
I tell everybody, I tell all the city council in Dayton there, I says, look, you run every 2 years. I see them every 3,000 miles. And these people have no issue talking to me. And sometimes you got to sit down and just listen to them. So you think the mayor's the most popular guy in town? No, it's the guy changing your oil, and then you can talk to the mayor for you. My dad told me that. He said, if you really want to find out about a company, if you ever go in there, he goes, go talk to the guy who's cleaning the bathrooms. Go to the guy who's schlepping the, and I never forgot that one either, right? And then when I ran a juvenile detention facility, my go-to person was our maintenance guy, because he was up and down the halls every day cleaning everything, and he knew what was going on better than the staff did, right? Because he's everywhere.
Yep. And I'll never forget, I went to interview when I was moving back to Minnesota, and I went to interview for a company. I won't name who they are, but they're kind of a large insurance company.
Okay.
And I asked the person at the front desk, I said, so how do you love your job, right? And there was this pause, right?
Dramatic or just regular?
Just regular pause. And really didn't, And I thought, interesting. Because usually you want to say, well, how do you like your job? Right? I love my job, right? I mean, that's what people want to talk. That gives me purpose, right? And so I thought, interesting. And so then I went and found one of the maintenance guys, right? And I just started talking to him. We're in the hallway, right? And he was just a cleaning guy, right? And not just a cleaning guy, but the guy, he had his name on there, right? And so I'm just chatting with him, and I asked him what I said, well, how do you love working here? And because we had struck up a relational conversation at the beginning, right? His information to me made me realize that I'm going into this interview and there's no way in God's green earth that I'm going to work for this company, right? I just thought, I made my mind up based upon the fact that there was a pause, and then this one individual was telling me what it was like to work there. And I noticed, I'm chatting with him, and people were walking by him and not even saying hi to him. He would say hi to somebody, and we'd say hi. It's like, whoa.
He's invisible to him.
Yeah, Tim, what's wrong with that, right?
Yeah, a lot of people do that with the handicapped.
Yeah.
If you're in a chair, they don't look at you. I've always been that guy. If you're in a chair, I'll get down on my knees and talk to you.
Yeah.
So, and I've had a lot of customers over the years that were special needs, and they're people.
Absolutely.
So, you got to listen to those guys.
Absolutely.
So we are like 40 minutes in the segment 2 here, and we got to pull a plug on this.
Let's call it a night.
So what do you want to tell people? What's the main thing that they want? What's the takeaway? What's your takeaway here?
My takeaway, Tim, I think, after a long year, we've proven in this state that we are incredibly strong, right? I mean, regardless of what you're seeing and out there, we've done a thing about, we've protected our neighbors throughout this whole COVID-19, whether you're on the right side or wrong side of the conversation. But the fact is, we've tried to do what we can do. And this state, because of Minnesota resilience, we're bouncing back economically. Tim, we thought we were going to have to cut $1 billion, right, in health and human services. We're at a budget surplus. We've done things right in Minnesota. And I think that's because having people that are truly there representing the communities that we live in is there throughout the process. And it's been an honor, Tim, to represent Champlin, Coon Rapids.
So represent the community, not the party.
That's what it should be about, right? Shouldn't it?
Well, you would hope.
Didn't that what I said?
It might have gotten through there somewhere.
Yeah. I don't think I mentioned party in that. Represent the community. Yeah, it is. That's funny. That's just natural for me to say that, because it is true. I represent the community, Tim.
Well, everybody appreciates what everybody does, even though a lot of you guys don't know what happens behind the scenes. Here it is. It's a Sunday. We are 4:00 in the afternoon. We started at 3?
Yeah.
You're here giving up your Sunday to have a conversation to some people that might listen. And again, we're in a lot of countries, so it ain't going to mean a lot to anybody else. But if you have legislation in your area, and they're like John here, and you want them to listen and pay attention like John, then get involved.
Yeah.
Know what your district is, or what do you call it in Africa, or what do you call it in Australia or Austria, or wherever you're listening. Whatever your parliament is, pay attention.
Yep.
Learn something. And for you young kids, I mean, probably never get this far into this podcast because, it ain't metal and banging your head on something.
You're so bad. Oops.
But if you want to pay attention and learn, because eventually you're going to run into this. So, John, we really appreciate the fact that you came in here in our studio on a Sunday and gave up some of your time to inform a lot of people.
It's always been fun. It's always great talking to you, Tim. Keep up the great work, and let's chat again.
For HUDcast, again, we're about 44 into the second segment. I got to cut some juice out of this. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Be safe. And that's a wrap for HUDcast. HUDcast is, again, a pragmatic approach to seeing things how some people see them. If you like our show, give us a thumbs up on the Facebook site. Again, for HUDcast, thank you again. Have a wonderful evening.